Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Is it good afternoon? You're not yet. Good morning to everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this workshop, which is fourth workshop on Islamic economics. Now we will start the fifth session. Here we have two papers to be presented. For the first paper, we have a guest from Tunisia. She is Khoutem Ben Jedidia. She had got her PhD in France, a university in Lyon, and his PhD thesis was about Islamic finance, isn't it? Okay. Okay. And today she will present a paper having a topic: how can Islamic banks achieve social justice? Actually, it is very interesting. Social justice and the commercial entity. Islamic banks are commercial entities, and they are founded for making profit. We will understand how she comments this. I will give 20 minutes to her first, and then also we will have further time for comments and questions. Okay, sister, please.
Thank you. I am pleased to participate to this fourth workshop on Islamic finance to present my paper entitled "How Can Islamic Banks Achieve Social Justice?" As you know, Islamic banks exist, so I think it is more easier to achieve social justice with a contribution of Islamic banks, more than compared with zakat, the zakat mechanism, because Islamic banks affect directly the distribution of income, not redistribution, and they exist and they dominate Islamic finance. Islamic banks dominate Islamic finance. We try then to answer to this question: how can Islamic banks achieve social justice? I start with the motivation and research question. Then I present Islamic bank principle and social justice. After Islamic bank mechanism towards social justice, I discuss the appraisal of Islamic banking's role in social justice. Finally, I conclude with recommendation. Islamic banks is governed by Islamic law, by Sharia, Quran, Sunnah, jurisprudence. It is then characterized by moral and ethical values. Islamic banks attempt to carry out justice and social welfare. In this context, at the financial level, Islamic banking, in principle, as argued by Usmani, does not solely focus on profit maximization, but also on establishing justice. Islamic banks, in fact, can avoid instability, stimulate fairly growth. It is so more focused on mobilizing savings than on money creation. The question of social justice is yet carried out. It requires further investigation, notably at a practical level. So the aim of my paper is to specify principle and mechanism of social justice in Islamic banking finance, and also to discuss whether Islamic banking has reached targets of social justice, and if no, how can it reach this? We know that the major principle of Islamic economics is the interdiction of riba, because it is considered as a profit gained without risk. In fact, money itself in Islamic has no intrinsic value. It can be only a means of transaction. So this principle of interdiction of riba stands for social justice, since the money holder has no any reward without taking risk. In reality, a fixed remuneration with interest it constitutes an injustice and exploitative instrument of financing. We can then argue that the forbidden of interest risk discourage concentration of wealth, and so it can lead to relational and distributional justice in the economy at whole. The second principle in Islamic economics is the interdiction of gharar and maisar. Gharar is related to uncertainty. It is associated with games of gambling. Also, gharar puts economics agent in situation of uncertainty, and he could suffer from unexpected losses. Then it results in social injustice. Games based on qimar and maisar leads to one single winner, while other participants are loser. This gain is based on luck and not on work or effort, which is injustice. So this principle enhances relational and distributional justice, as it mentions the equality between economic agents. The third principle in Islamic finance is the interdiction of illicit sector. That means that it is illicit to earn money by investing in activities such as alcohol, porn, drugs. The forbidden of such sectors avoid the finance of harmful and sinful goods, which lead to a high social and economic cost. So this principle also contributes to social justice. The main principle also, profit and loss sharing, which characterizes the Islamic banking, assumes that the parties of a financial transaction must share together the risk and the returns. The remuneration is so related to the involvement of the financial capital to create wealth. It is leading to equitable sharing. So this principle encourages equal income distribution for the benefit of social justice. The last principle is the principle of asset backing, which means that all financial transactions must be linked to real assets. This avoids discordance between real and financial sphere, growth inhibiting financial crisis as in conventional system, and inflation. So this principle contributes to more value added to our productive system and social justice. So we can say that Islamic bank principle theoretically leads to social justice. But this is not enough. We need an adequate implementation of mechanisms in Islamic banks to reach social justice that we will demonstrate. Social justice can be in three aspects. The first is the equitable distribution of wealth. The second aspect is the provision of basic necessities of life. And the third aspect is the protection of the weak against economic hardship. We will demonstrate how can Islamic banks contribute to the three aspects of social justice. For the first, we know that Islamic banking is distinguished from conventional one by musharaka and mudarba. This musharaka and mudarba allocate funds based on viability of project rather than on creditworthiness of entrepreneur, which, as argued by Hassan and Qaid, leads to efficient and equitable distribution of wealth and income. The equitable distribution of wealth is also between a depositor in investment account in a bank and the bank, because the contract is mudarba. So Islamic banks theoretically should select a project to finance wealth and income growth with social economic goals for a better social justice. For the second aspect, the contribution to the supply of basic necessity, we know that the principle of distribution in Islamic economics is the first need and then sufficient for every citizen. Islamic banks perform a social intermediation as they collect zakat, fund zakat from their customers and also the zakat on the bank capital. So they distribute zakat and help to promote equality and sufficiency of poor. Islamic banks take funds available through Qard al-Hasan, interest-free loan. Also, Islamic banks permit to fulfill Islamic human needs and reduce social disparities thanks to social intermediation of banks. The third aspect of social justice is the equality to access to finance and protection of weak against economic hardship. Islamic banks try to overcome financial exclusion by providing financing to small business to workers. It tries to guarantee justice in the access to finance, to markets, to investment, to technology. Mudaraba and notably musharaka, which encourage entrepreneurship, can protect the weak against the economic hardship. When the bank is associated with the investor through musharaka or mudaraba, it can protect the investor notably to lead to have more results. So the intervention of Islamic banking appears to be able to ensure the three aspects of social justice. The question now, do Islamic banks in practice achieve these objectives? To answer to this question, we can say that following their principle, as we have said, Islamic banks are able to fulfill social justice goals, but they need to adopt practical action. There is a gap between promised social role and practical performance of Islamic banking. In reality, as we have highlighted in our previous paper with Mansour and Majdoub, the practice of Islamic banking misrepresents Islam and does not contribute in reality to solving social problems, focusing on their profitability. Also, Islamic financial institutions have deviated from their social welfare objective. We can explain this by the fact that social dimension of bank is only restricted to zakat, rather than working toward the capacity building for development communities. The limited share of musharaka and mudaraba in finance offered by Islamic banks hinders the objective of equitable distribution. In fact, there is a dominance of conventional quasi product, notably murabaha, which do not allow the Islamic banking to elevate social injustice and inequity. We are near the conventional system. The social lending Qard Hasan is only limited for all banks to 1% of the financing offered, which do not comply with the supply of basic necessities of life. Islamic banks collect research from a large spectrum, but they make them available only for a smaller one. There is a focus on the form, the legal form, rather than on the substance of Sharia. Also, there is a lack of effort to implement mechanisms for practical realization of social justice. So, we can conclude and notably present recommendation for this issue. We can say that achieving the social balance is a requirement in Islamic economics, which is governed by ethical and moral values. Islamic banking sector, which is growing, can play a key role in challenging economy towards social justice at distributive, relational, and retributive level. We have demonstrated that Islamic banking principle conveys them to relational and distributional social justice. But the compliance to this principle is not enough. It cannot only itself guarantee the achievement to social justice goal. There is a gap between expected social role of Islamic banks and their practical performance. So, there are recommendations. Islamic banks are invited to, notably, revise their strategies by integrating the social aspect of activities and not focusing on legal aspect only. The contract can be legal Sharia compliant, but it is not social compliant. To relate to their social and economic ends of their financial transaction, to permit the access of financing to more customers, since it is limited to smaller one. Also, they can increase the payless investment, which it is the only to guarantee the equitable share and risk sharing between economic agents for equitable distribution of wealth. But I think the best recommendation is that Islamic banking should build a social justice committee as they have a Sharia committee to control the compliance with Sharia. They must have a social justice committee to control their compliance to social role of Islamic banking. They also have to growing their social lending, notably Qard Hasan, to serve more people in needs and allow the weak people to access to finance. But this effort must be with a strategy of public authorities that can help Islamic banking to achieve their social justice role. I want not to be pessimist, but it is the reality. And Islamic banks can do more in this field to achieve social justice. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sister. Thank you also for timing.
Mikrofona basabilir.
Thank you also for timing. Your topic was how can Islamic banks achieve social justice, and you criticized Islamic banks in this sense. And you stressed profit sharing and asset-backed qualifications. Actually, regarding this topic, maybe we should focus on the ownership of the Islamic banks. The banks we call Islamic are business entities, are companies and established by shareholders to make money. They are not established by wakafs. If they were established by wakafs, the position should be different. But regarding the business model of the Islamic banks, as she says, profit sharing should be there and asset backed should be there. the fund collecting part, the liability side of the balance sheet of the Islamic banks, actually depending on profit sharing. It depends on mudaraba contract. The depositors come to Islamic bank as sahibil mal, and the bank becomes mudarib. This is profit sharing. But in other side, when these funds are used by the customers of the Islamic bank, as also she mentioned in his paper, the percentage of profit sharing is very low, maybe 5%. 5%. 95% is murabaha, but it is asset-backed. When we look in this aspect, it is not bad. It is asset-backed. Comparing with the conventional banks, it is better, of course, to be asset-backed, but not profit-sharing. Okay, the format of this workshop is that first the presentation is done, as you know, and just after the presentation, there is a discussant. Our discussant for the first paper coming from Istanbul Medipol University, Nurullah Gül, is he here? Please, also please you introduce your university briefly and yourself. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. I'm Nurullah Gül. I'm from Istanbul Medical University, from the Departments of Economics and Finance. I would like to thank the organizers, and also I would like to thank our sister to contribute the literature. After the global financial crisis, we started to discuss about the relationship between finance and social justice. Before the global financial crisis, the finance literature agreed that financial development not only increase economic growth, but at the same time it reduces poverty and income inequality. But unfortunately, the global financial crisis showed us that financial system will create poverty and inequality, because after the global financial crisis, unemployment rate rises, poverty rate rises, and income inequality rises. So the academicians start to think about whether there will be an alternative financial system which will create wealth, so which will increase growth, but at the same time it will achieve social justice. So in this paper, the author tries to answer whether Islamic finance will be an alternative which achieves social justice. And in order to do that, the paper put forth some channels through which Islamic financial system can do this. For example, the abolition of interest rate and gharar. So I'm totally agree that the abolition of interest rate and gharar will reduce income inequality and poverty. Because as Thomas Piketty shows in his famous book, when the return rate on capital exceeds economic growth, then income inequality rises. So this means that interest rate will create the concentration of wealth, and therefore the interest rate will increase income inequality and will increase social immobility. And as a second mechanism, the author says that Islamic finance can avoid financial crisis. I'm also totally agree with this, but it would be better to put some recent papers which also shows that Islamic banks are stronger than conventional banks during the economic crisis. According to an IMF research, Islamic financial institutions contributed to economic and financial stability during the economic crisis because they performed well, they performed better in terms of asset growth and credit growth as well. So it will be better to put some papers which mention that Islamic banks are much more stronger than conventional banks during the time of recessions and economic crisis. As another mechanism through which Islamic banks can achieve social justice is the following: the contribution of Islamic banks to collect and distribute zakat. I'm skeptical about this issue because at the end of the day, Islamic banks are profit-oriented firms. So they try to maximize their profits. And I think they are not so eager to collect and distribute zakat. And if they have this aim, I think that they don't have human capital to do that. So they don't have human capital to collect and distribute zakat. And at the same time, I also think that individuals will not prefer to give their zakat through the Islamic banks. So as a Muslim, for example, I don't prefer to give my zakat through the financial system. As a suggestion, the author sometimes made strong statements. For example, Islamic banks aim to provide basic necessities of life to poor and fulfill basic human needs, and doing so, they contribute social justice. And another example, Islamic banks guarantee a justice in the access of finance. I think these are strong statements. It will be better to avoid making such strong statements. This is just a suggestion. The author also doesn't mention about recent empirical literature on the effect of Islamic banks on financial inclusion. There is a growing literature which focus on the effect of Islamic banks on financial inclusion, and these are empirical papers. These empirical papers showed us mixed results. Some papers find that Islamic banks contribute financial inclusion, and there are some papers which do not find any significant relationship. So it will be better to mention this paper. In generally, the author mostly focus on theoretically why Islamic banks can achieve social justice. But our sister doesn't give too much weight on why in reality this system doesn't work. So it will be better to give more weight on why there is a gap between theory and reality in Islamic financial system. It will be a good contribution, I think. So I enjoy reading your paper. I hope it will be better after my comments and also after the comments from the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nurullah, for your discussion. It is very useful. I guess you will benefit from it. After listening to this paper and the discussant, I thought something about the topic of the paper. You say, how can Islamic banks achieve social justice? What about to say, how can Islamic banks achieve social development instead of justice. Why do I say this? The recent development in Islamic finance is to converge with responsible finance in the West. In the West, there is a concept called ethical finance or responsible finance. And in our side, there is Islamic finance. And there are some issues overlapping with responsible finance and Islamic finance. If we say social development, then we can also advise some principles to the Islamic banks when they make investment. For example, what about a question when Islamic banks making investment to invest a departmental store which sells alcohol, and in other side finance a business entity in a developing country, let's say, having employees underaged and not paying the enough wages to employees, which is responsible finance. If an Islamic bank finances a ready-made garments company in an developing or underdeveloped country which has workers poor and in bad conditions, but the company is making profit, this should be considered. Okay, thank you. Now we have, also let me add something. Bank Negara, Malaysian Islamic Bank, established an institute, Responsible Finance Institute Foundation based in London. And now they are working to promote responsible finance in Islamic finance. It is not enough to be interest-free, but also Islamic finance should be responsible, ethical, and she advises to Islamic banks to have a social justice committee. Also, she says besides the Sharia committee, for example, the Sharia board members in Malaysia say that the Central Bank of Malaysia imposes us only to look for the documentation of the financial instrument, if it is Islamic or not. But they are not asking us for the impact of the financing. If they ask us, the Sharia people say, about the impact of the financing, our fatwa will be different. Therefore, maybe even for Sharia board, we can add to their responsibility not only to look at the documentation of the financing, but also impact of the financing. To whom is this money going, and how will the customer will do with that money? Our second paper will be presented by Ozan Maraşlı. He is a master's degree student in Ankara University. The topic of the paper is Interest and Social Justice, Impact of Real Interest Rate on Income Inequality. Ozan, you have 20 minutes, please.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. I would like to thank the organizers firstly to contribute the Islamic economics literature with such an organization. And also, I would like to thank Mr. Nurullah about his valuable contribution to my paper. My core hypothesis is interest rates impact social justice in the context of income inequality, and he gives valuable contribution about it with the evidences from the conventional economics literature. So, inshallah, I will start with an overview and then a theoretical background which shows that interest and social justice, which shows the link between interest and social justice, and then I will explain my empirical study and the findings, and then I will give the conclusions and some suggestions about the situation. First, I want to start with a strong tradition of Islamic civilization, as you all know, which starts with Quran and then Sunnah and the leading scholars of the field. So I want to just emphasize the Suratul Hashr's 7th verses about the income inequality. As you all know that, Euzu billahi mineşşeytanirracim, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And what Allah restored to His messenger from the people of the towns, it is for Allah and for the messenger and for his near relatives and orphans and the stranded traveler, so that it will not be a perpetual distribution among the rich from among you. And whatever the messenger has given you, take, and what he has forbidden you, refrain from. And fear Allah, indeed Allah is severe in penalty. And then I would also like to give the Suratul Hadith's 25th verse. It is about the social justice. We have already sent our messengers with clear evidences and sent down with them the scripture and the balance that the people may maintain their affairs in justice. And we sent down iron wherein is great military might and benefits for the people, and so that Allah may make evident those who support him and his messengers unseen. Indeed, Allah is powerful and exalted in might. And also in the relation to social justice, by the narration of Al-Mu'mineen Aisha radiallahu anha, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam states that the people who came before you were destroyed because whenever a noble person among them stole, they would let him go. But if one who was weak stole, they would carry out the had punishment on him. Then he said, by the one in whose hand is my soul, if my daughter Fatima bint Muhammad was to steal, I would cut off her hand. It is, you can find this hadith in Sunan Nasai. And also in the last sermon, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam states that Allah has forbidden you take usury, interest, therefore all interest obligations shall henceforth be waived. Your capital is yours to keep. You will neither inflict nor suffer any inequity. Allah has judged that there shall be no interest, and that all the interest due to Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, his prophet's uncle, be waived. And you can find it in Al-Bukhari. Let's take an overview. Chapra, in his influential study, which name is What is Islamic Economics, explicitly asserts that Islamic economics is based on a paradigm which has socioeconomic justice as its primary objective. He just classifies some main topics that Islamic economics should contribute to social justice as need fulfillment, respectable source of earning, or equitable distribution of income and wealth, and growth and stability. Also, Naqvi, in his influential work, Islam, Economics and Society, he gives an axiomatic approach to the issue and classifies some axioms. I just give two of them, Tawhid and Al-Adl wal-Ihsan. Tawhid as oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it constitutes the vertical dimension, which links the finite and imperfect institutions with the perfect being, and also al-adl wal-ihsan, we can say equilibrium and beneficence, describes the horizontal dimension by which the various elements of life be ordered to produce the best economic dispensation. And also he's also explained that justice provides for a complete description of all the virtues of the basic set of social institutions, both legal, political, and economic. And also he states that on the economic plane, the principle desires a first best configuration of the production, consumption, and distribution activities, with the clear understanding that the needs of all the least privileged members in Muslim society constitute the first charge on the real resource of the society. And as I said, we will analyze the link between interest and social justice in the context of income inequality. I will just want to give brief information about the main concepts. Social justice is a question of equal opportunities, which seeks to establish a fair and just relation between the individual and the society. And in that sense, equitable income and wealth distribution is one of the key indicators of the social justice. Well, it is okay, but a question comes to the mind that what constitutes the income? Income, we mean by income all the money received from employment, including wage, salaries, and bonuses, and the investment, including interests, dividends, and savings, pensions, rent, etc. So its scope is wider than the perceived concept. In that sense, income inequality threats the existence and stability of social justice. An overall state of income inequality in the world has been increased in last decades. Let's take an overview about it. You can see the regions that it is Africa, Arab states, and European, Latin and Central America, and it is their Gini indexes. So from the early 1990s to the late 2000s, percentage change is in general increased, as you can see. In Africa, it decreases by 7.5%, and also in European region, it increases sharply by 32.7%. And what's the link between income inequality and interest? As I said, I just give these informations for give a brief theoretical background about the situation. Interest is one of the most outstanding factors which violates income inequality and thereby social justice. Also, it distorts the socio-economic equilibrium. And in Suratul Baqarah's, the verse of 279, it is named as zulm, oppression by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also the threat of war from Allah and His Messenger in the same ayah is adequate to understand the degree of this oppression in the society. Chopra explains how interest has a distorting impact in society. Injustice undermines brotherhood and solidarity, accentuates conflict, tensions, and crime, aggravates human problems, and thus leads ultimately to nothing but misery in this world and as well as in the hereafter. Also, Necdetullah Siddiqui states that modern researchers have shown that it results in inefficient allocation of society's resources, as it contributes to the instability of the system, because burden should be undertaken by entrepreneurs and workers. Thus, the value of participation, labor, and risk-taking become less meaningful, and access to finance of the bottom income groups cannot be realized because the wealth and income are more likely to possessed by top income groups. And also, it is a type of zulm, meaning injustice, by which the wealth and income concentrate on the hands of the rich, as I read in the previous verses. And Nakvi has a valuable contribution about the concept of zulm. He says that it denotes a social disequilibrium in the sense that the resources of society flow from the poor to rich. So there is an allocation of resources which flows from the poor to rich by the mechanism of interest rate. So I will just want to explain this situation by a brief and simple instance. It is inspired by Zaragoza. When you can see that there is just wait. There is 8 times, but it constitutes just 4 months. There are 3 people: individual A, individual B, and individual C. Individual A can save $1,000 per month, and individual B can save $100 per month, and individual C cannot save. So every month they save respectively 1,000, 100, and nothing. And also the ones who can afford to save take interest by 10% monthly, and you can see the difference between them. The bottom, at the individual at the bottom, who is individual C, you can see with the green line, and I would like to emphasize the widening income gap between individual A and individual C. You can see by the 4 months, the income gap between individual A and individual C can be widened by 27.63%. It is very enormous numbers, so that it can simply shows the impact of interest on income inequality. Let's take a look at the conventional literature about the subject. I would just give 2 instances by the Brano Milanovic and Joseph Stiglitz. You can see the conclusions of Milanovic. It is the real interest rate, and these are the income percentiles by 10%. It is the poorest income group, and it is the poorest 10% income group, second, third, and it is the richest one. So he concludes that income inequality is always pro-rich, meaning that you can see that its impact, it's the impact of the increase in real interest rate increases the income inequality by increasing the incomes of 9th and 10th income groups, income of the income groups, and the remaining ones, even middle class loses, and also the poorest loses, as you can see in the table. Also, on the other hand, Stiglitz found out that low interest rates also leads to an inequalizing effect, because in that sense he concluded that lowering real interest rate leads to an increase in the net income of capitalists by a certain amount and a reduction of income of workers by a corresponding amount. it is in effect a direct transfer from workers to capitalists. We can also give the instance of Fed's near zero level interest rate policies, as it has some negative externalities on income inequality because it increases the stock prices, so the stock owners be more advantageous, and it also provides low borrowing costs for large corporations that they can have an additional capital to boost their profits. Consequently, real interest rate has a distortive effect on income inequality. Regardless its impact stems from either its rise or fall, it does not necessarily be low or high in order to increase the inequality. The problem stems from the system which operates on the basis of interest. It's my main hypothesis in this study. Thus, the aim of this study is to show the impact of real interest rate on income inequality on a relational basis. I would not get into the channels through which the real interest rate impacts income inequality. It only concentrates on the distortive effect of real interest rate on income inequality. Okay, I will conclude that. We have a panel data which covers 77 countries across the world, and the years between 2004 and 2011, and we have just 362 country year observations, and we have 6 samples: Asia, Central and Latin America, OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, developing countries, developed countries, and world. And this is our model. So our dependent variables, Gini index and Palmer ratio. As you know, there are some criticism about Gini index because it concentrates on the changes in the income inequality. It is more sensitive on the middle income groups rather than the top and bottom. But Palmer ratio measures the top 10% and bottom measures the ratio between top 10% and bottom 40%, so that it is more sensitive to the top and bottom changes. Our independent variables: real interest rate, GDP growth rate, secondary school enrollment rate, and rural population, and explanatory variables as trade openness, agriculture sector value added, size of the shadow economy, price level of investment, and real interest rate in square term, as we can show its impact on income inequality more precisely. So I will not get into the numbers. I will just want to show the impact of them. As you can see the summary of the table. So interest rate increases the income inequality in Central and Latin America, developing countries, developed countries, and the world sample. It is evident in my study. And also, just let's concentrate on the world sample because it has the more precise results. So GDP growth rate increases, secondary school enrollment rate decreases, income inequality, rural population decreases, agriculture sector value added decreases, and price level of investment decreases. So in general, the findings show that interest rate has a significant influence on income inequality, which proves that the thesis of this hypothesis of this study is valid either for lower or higher real interest rates. In the light of these findings, the real interest rate leads to distortions in income inequality and thereby social justice. Both low and high interest rates may have a distortive impact on income. Hence, the thing that produces the inequalities is not the increasing or decreasing or lower or higher interest, rather it is interest itself. Someone can say that let's pull the interest to the zero level, but zero rate of interest is not a solution either, because it is not adequate to span an Islamic economy, as I also explained in the Fed's near zero level interest rate policies consequences, and we should concentrate on the behaviors of microeconomic agents within a systemic understanding. In that sense, it is also not sufficient to abolish interest in the economy by and change it by profit and loss sharing ratio only. Naqvi has a very valuable contribution about this situation. He says that to replace interest by profit is not necessarily an Islamic reform either, because it might replace capitalism based on interest and profit by a capitalism which is based on only profit. It is very important thing for the ones who study Islamic economics. Thus, income inequalizing and distortive effect of real interest rates should be evaluated within the systemic understanding. Hence, the main focus should be on constructing an economic system whose framework, value system, foundational axioms, methodology, operational principles, mechanisms, and functional institutions are derived from the Quran and Sunnah, as economic subspace should be analyzed within an integrated framework in which the moral, legal, political, and social subspaces are also taken into account. So the prohibition of interest is the order of Almighty Allah. Resulting income inequality and social injustice may constitute two of the wisdoms behind this prohibition. Allahu Alam. So the success can be attained through by following the holy teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we as Muslims should strive to prove our claim, the claim of submitting ourselves to Allah as His slaves. Jazakumullahu khairan for your patience and understanding.
Thank you, Ozan. It was interesting paper. I guess this is your master's thesis also, huh? No? No? No. Okay. Well, also, the paper includes an empirical study, therefore it is valuable. Now, we have a colleague coming from Sabahattin Zaim University, Hafsa Orhan, to make discussion of this paper. Please. Please introduce your university and yourself before you start.
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zeynep Hafsa Orhan. I'm from Sabahattin University, Sabahattin Zaim University from Istanbul. I'm an assistant professor at the International Trade and Finance Department there. And today I got the opportunity to discuss this paper. First, I would like to thank the author to work in such a subject, because I find it quite valuable, quite important to work on such a subject, because I think this is one of the problems about the studies in Islamic economics and finance. We take many things as granted. What I mean with it is that, for example, everyone, when you ask them, they can say that, okay, interest is harmful, interest is bad. Okay, how do you know? Or how can you evidence it? It is also quite important, I think, to understand it better through what procedures, how much actually they are harmful. So I think this is a very nice step to also prove it, how actually it is harmful on injustice. The procedure that I will follow for my discussion is point by point to go through what he has done in his paper, and I will try to add my comments on it. Then you can also follow what he has done and what I can say additionally for his efforts. So firstly, the author actually points the importance of justice, and while doing that, he mentions some famous names such as Chopra and Naqvi, as you also saw. And as a second step, income inequality is put forward as the key indicator of the social justice. This is, of course, not the only and maybe not the main indicator for income inequality, social justice, but it's fair enough, I think, to select it due to its measurability, especially through Gini coefficient. But still, I think we can think through more what else we can use actually to measure in some different ways rather than the Gini coefficient. And thirdly, in this context, the author shares information about the current situation regarding income inequality in the world through two tables. You also saw them. So they give a general idea. And as a fourth step, he shows the interest as one of the main factors distorting income inequality and justice. While doing that, he mentioned some works from Iqbal, Chopra, Siddiqui, Zaman and Zaman. And I wonder at this point whether there are any studies conducting empirical analysis in the subject. I know he mentions Zaragoza, Milanovic and Stiglitz, I know that, but especially the Muslim scholars, I'm quite interested in. I do not know if we can find more empirical analysis, especially done by Muslim scholars, regarding the effect of interest on income inequality. I find this important. And as a small and important, I think, comment, I can say him that he does not have a detailed separate section regarding literature review. This is quite an important thing. I think it would be better if he does that for the continuation of his work. I can give also a hint in this regard that as an addition to the empirical works that he mentions, he can add a recent IMF work in that regard from 2015. It's quite a nice work. They're trying to understand the impact of interest on also inequality, as far as I can remember. As a fifth step, the author constructs his own econometric model, including 362 country-year observations across 12 numeric variables from 77 countries from 7 regions. He said 6, I think, mistakenly while he was saying it. 7 regions between the year of 2004 and 2011, and he follows he makes the following tests called Hausmann test, LM test, and multicollinearity tests. You don't need to know about them, but there are no problems in following them. And in his econometric model, he uses 4 main independent variables: real interest rate, GDP per capita growth, secondary school enrollment, and logarithmic version of rural population to measure the effect of these things on income inequality, which is measured by Gini coefficient. Just for people who does not know the general idea of an econometric model, simply, it is this: we have something which is affecting, and we have something which is affected. So he has 4 variables which are possibly affecting the income inequality measured by Gini coefficient. Just my comment here is that these 4 variables can be extended by looking the similar subjects, similar works in the subject. For example, some of the additional independent variables that I can suggest to him is, for example, growth in technology. Gender is also an important item which can affect income inequality, flexibility of labor market, and financialization. So these variables can have also quite serious effects on income inequality. So I suggest him that for further research he can consider some of these variables to add into his econometric model. So when we come to the 6th step of his work, we see that he makes conclusions based on his econometric analysis. He finds actually that for Central and Latin America, for developing countries, developed countries, and for the world, he finds that there is an effect of real interest rates on income inequality, meaning that interest is having actually bad effect on income inequality in these places. One thing that I would like especially to comment on is that in Organization of Islamic countries, he does not find a positive relationship. Even though he says that on page 16, real interest rate has a positive impact on income inequality. On the results, I only saw the negative numbers, so which means that in Islamic organization countries, the effect of real interest rate is negative on income inequality, which you can take that it does not affect badly. I don't know, it's very interesting results, so I wish that he could talk more about in that. Actually, I found his work very interesting, but maybe because of inexperience, he started to give more details on stuff that does not take so much importance. I was sitting there and thinking that, oh no, he cannot make to explain the more important stuff, and he could not make, unfortunately, but this is quite important point, I think. Another thing is that these are a bit more detailed things maybe. When you are making comment about the effect of the independent variables on the dependent one, you comment that, for example, 1% of change makes 0.042, let's say, effect. Whatever the percentage you are using, it means that the effect should be in terms of percentage also, just as a small comment. And also I would like to see P levels on the tables of the econometric models, because it would be much easier for me to make comments if the beta coefficients are insignificant or not. These are just technical details, small things. And lastly, he makes the final comments, as you also saw, that he found in general, especially around the world, that real interest rate, whether low or high, actually makes bad or negative effect on the income inequality, which is an important conclusion, I think. Then he adds some suggestions. I think for further research, I can suggest him to go more detail into the channels through why, for example, why real interest rate is having negative effects on some parts of the world. So through which channels? Then, because if we know the channels more, we can deal with them better also, I think. So these are my comments about his paper. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Hafsa Orhan. Actually, it was very perfect and comprehensive discussion. Thank you for your discussion. I guess Ozan will benefit from it. Of course, we should open first the floor for the presenters to defend themselves for the discussions. First, presentation has been done by Khoutem, and it was discussed by Nurullah. And now I will give around 5 minutes to you to respond to the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for your useful comments. First of all, I think that Islamic banks can play a key role in collect zakat, because we have a problem with the collect of zakat amount. You know that Islamic banking can have zakat accounts. Zakat accounts permit to banks to collect fund of zakat of their customers and of the bank itself. So it is the first step, I think, to collect zakat, but later Islamic bank can have a relationship with associative committee or zakat committee, if there is one, in the country to allocate this zakat fund to mustahaq. This is the first response. I will integrate empirical new research in my paper. The question, the important question, why Islamic banks do not reach this aim of social justice. I think the problem is that they do not offer musharaka and mudaraba at we hope. They offer only 5% of their financial musharaka and mudaraba. This is related to legal problem, also to the competition with conventional banks expected in Iran and Sudan. There are conventional banks and Islamic banks. Islamic banks are not dominant in these countries, and so they cannot offer musharaka and mudarba and also be in the market with the competition of conventional banks. Donc the problem, I think, is to improve, to concentrate effort to have more musharaka and mudaraba. In this means they can play a role in social justice. Your comment about the title, it is, I argue that social justice is in social development because Islamic banks try to have a different vision of development strategies, unlike conventional one. Also, social development, I think, needs that the authorities have strategies for the social development. Islamic bank only, they cannot have, it must be at macroeconomics level and not at banking level, at financial level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ozan. Now I will give the word to Ozan. But before that, also I will ask a question to him, or I will ask if it is possible. In your research, is it possible to discriminate between interest on loan for consumption and interest on loan for trade and investment?
Yes.
Here, you do not discriminate these things.
Yes, it is very important point.
Okay, please, you have time, you can talk.
Thanks for it. Actually, in my paper, you cannot make this distinction, but it should be made because by this discrimination we can see the impact of the real impact of the interest rate on income inequality in a better way. I actually thought it, but because of the reason that the research process will be longer, so that I just don't want to make it. But it is a very good point, and I also want to make very valuable contributions of Ms. Orhan. Firstly, I want to start from the OIC issue because it is very important. Yes, it has negative impact on income inequality, and also I tried to measure its impact very more precisely, and I found out that roughly until the percentage of 17, increase in the real interest rates consequently results in decrease in the income inequality. But after the point of 17%, it starts to increase it. But it has many reasons about it. For example, the participation of the conventional financing activities in the region may constitute one of the reasons, because I thought that it is relatively low when we compared it with the other regions and samples. And also, when you get in detail the analysis of OIC, we can say that in the first trial of the regression, the variable is insignificant, both in 5% and 10%. So that when I add the explanatory variables, it becomes more significant. So I also can feel that there may be a problem. So also, when we assume that it has a negative impact on the income inequality in OIC sample, my main hypothesis is interest rate has an distortive impact on income equality. So that I mean that if it decreases the income inequality, it should be also evaluated within a systemic understanding, because there are many channels through which the interest rate can affect the income inequality. So the second thing is literature review. Actually, I made a wide literature review, like for 7 pages, but because of the organization's limitations about the word numbers, I couldn't publish it in the study. But if there are ones who want to take it, I can share with them. For example, the suggestions about adding the growth of technology, gender, flexibility of labor, and the financialization variables can also add the study. Actually, I select these 8 variables, both independent and both explanatory variables, from roughly 20 among the 20 variables. I actually tried them one by one, and then I took the significant ones to make a better study. And also, I didn't mention. I mentioned that 6 samples, yes, because I also don't want to emphasize the sub-Saharan region about a technical detail, because F statistics is insignificant in the sample, so that I just don't want to take it. And also, I can say that yes, further research can be conducted by researching channels through which interest influence on income inequality, but probably it can be a PhD thesis, something like that, because it is very wider research. So, as I indicated in the presentation, I just want to measure the impact on a relational basis, and that's all. I really want to take the valuable contributions of her. Thank you.
Thank you, Ozan. We have already listened to the papers and discussions. I hope these provoked your minds to ask some questions, maybe some comments. We have time. Before you ask question, please introduce yourself. Yes.
I'm Furkan. I'm come from Bilkent University. I'm at economics department. I have two questions. The first question is to the first discussant. He mentions that Islamic banking or Islamic banks maintained their strong position in the financial crisis by means of asset growth and credit growth. Actually, how can this happen? Since even if they're focusing on solely, not solely profit maximization. Sorry, my second question is to the second discussant, but second discussant. Yes, okay. She mentions that recent studies show growth in technology, financialization, and gender affect income inequality. Then I can't get that. How growth in technology and financialization affect income inequality, and does he mean by saying gender? Actually, women participation in the workforce. That's all.
Thank you. Let's have the question first. Another question. Quick.
Thank you. My question is for the first presenter. Thank you for nice delivery. You mentioned that Islamic banks should have social committee like Sharia board, and they also should increase interest-free loan, Quart Hasan, which is 1%. On the other hand, this will cause an extra cost for Islamic banks, and they will, in a competition with conventional banks at the same market. What do you think about that part of the issue? Because in the long term, the Islamic banks will not grow enough because of this competition issue. Thank you.
Thirdly, any question? Please.
Yes, actually, my question is strictly connected with the question already made, and it's on the proposal about the introduction of a social committee, social justice committee. Not from the perspective of the cost, of the added cost, but as you know, speaking of the governance of Islamic financial institution, the Sharia Supervisory Board already represents another step of complexity in comparison with conventional banks. Now, your idea is to add another committee. I did not understand if you think of two separate committees, and this would create some sort of conflict between their position, or if your suggestion is just to combine the Sharia Supervisory Board in the light of a social justice committee in order to have, let's say, a preliminary Sharia compliance evaluation plus a social impact evaluation. It's a problem of governance in the end, from my perspective.
Okay, thank you. Now, please, Khoutem and Jedidia, you make the comment.
Thank you. In reality, I began with the second question. The social committee, as you suggest, can be combined with Sharia committee to avoid, we know that there are many problems of governance with this Sharia. We can have a committee with both discuss whether financial Islamic banking financial transactions are compliant with Sharia, and also we add the social aim or social goal, because it is important to look to the social end of transaction, not only to the conformity with the legal aspect. The cost, Yes, but as we have a committee of Sharia, we can add to him the committee of justice, social justice aim. For the first question, Islamic banks was stronger in facing the crisis because there is a stronger relationship between real and financial transaction. This is, I think, the most important reason for which Islamic banking was saved from a crisis like conventional one. Following their profit maximization, Islamic Bank invited to maximize their profit, yes, but they are invited also to have a social role. This requires, I think, that the policy helps banks, Islamic banks, to have this role in the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the word to Ozan to make his response.
Actually, the question was not to me, to the Ms. Orhan, but
there was one question over there.
Yes, but yes, it is for discussant.
Doesn't matter.
Yes, I can only say that as a contribution for gender and growth in technology, I don't know, but for financialization, there is a research conducted in 2009 by IMF researchers about which measures the impact of financialization on income inequality. I can share it with the ones who want to take it, and that's all for me.
Okay, Dr. Orhan, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I can just add that the effect of gender on income inequality is something which is quite researched well in the subject, because that if you have different genders, even if you do the same jobs, you can get different incomes from it. So this is the reason. And about technology growth, they assume in literature that if the technology growth is high, then the income inequality would decrease. So there is such an effect. And about financialization, it is also assumed that financialization would whether decrease or increase the income inequality. It is not decided, the final effect of it. But yeah, these are quite well discussed variables which can have effect on.
Okay, please.
Just small contribution. I just want to add to this technological change issue. There is this theory of skill-biased technological change. There is this argument about technology. As technology improves, it is because it is skill-biased towards high-skilled workers. It increases the inequality. So adding a technological change variable to the regression, we might improve the results. That was my contribution. Okay, thank you.
Another question or comment? Okay, now we are ending session 5. Before I close the session, let me congratulate the organizers. They are doing very good work. Now this is the 4th. I hope it will continue 5, 6, 7 in the future. I appreciate the paper presenters and discussants. It was very good quality. And we benefited. I guess all the participants benefited from it. Also, I thank for the patience of the audience. Now I close the session. Esselamu Aleyküm.